I wish someone had made this video before I started playing Conquest of Azeroth. Seriously, when I first logged into Conquest of Azeroth, I thought I already knew what I was getting into. I've played World of Warcraft for years. I've played Ascension before. I've leveled countless characters across different expansions, and I figured I'd have everything under control. I couldn't have been more wrong. Within my first few hours, I was making mistakes that cost me time, gold, and a whole lot of frustration. I chose talents without understanding how they interacted. I ignored systems that turned out to be incredibly important later on. I sold items that I eventually needed, skipped mechanics that would have made leveling much smoother, and spent far too long trying to play this game like it was retail WoW. The truth is, Conquest of Azeroth isn't just another WoW private server. It's much closer to an entirely new MMORPG built on WoW's engine. Sure, you'll recognize familiar zones, mobs, and cities, but almost everything else has been redesigned. The classes are completely original, the specializations feel unique, the talent trees are massive, and even the way your character progresses feels different. That's exactly why making the right decisions early matters so much. Whether you're creating your very first character, returning after a long break, or simply trying to figure out what makes Conquest of Azeroth different from every other version of WoW, this video is for you. These aren't random beginner tips you can find anywhere. These are lessons I learned the hard way, sometimes after wasting hours doing things the inefficient way. So before you jump into Azeroth, here are 25 things I genuinely wish I knew before starting Conquest of Azeroth. Tip number 1. Forget everything you know about World of Warcraft. The biggest mistake I made wasn't choosing the wrong class or the wrong talents. It was assuming I already understood the game. The moment you launch Conquest of Azeroth, your brain naturally starts comparing everything to retail WoW, classic WoW, or maybe Wrath of the Lich King. That's completely normal. After all, you're still walking through Elwyn Forest, Orgrimmar is still there, and Stormwind still feels familiar. But underneath that familiar surface, this is an entirely different game. Combat works differently. Class design works differently. Progression works differently. Talents work differently. Itemization works differently. Even your expectations of what makes a class good need to change. One thing I noticed is that a lot of new players rush straight to asking, "What's the strongest class?" Honestly, that's the wrong question. Instead, ask yourself, which class looks the most fun? Because Conquest of Azeroth has been built around giving every class its own fantasy rather than simply recreating Blizzard's designs. If you approach the game with an open mind instead of constantly comparing it to retail, you're going to have a much better experience. Think of this less as another WoW expansion and more like learning a completely new MMO that just happens to use Azeroth as its world. That mindset alone will save you hours of frustration. Tip number 2. Spend time choosing your class. This might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people rush through character creation. They see a cool-looking class, click it, skip every description, and hit Enter World. I almost did the same thing. Take your time. Seriously. Unlike retail WoW, where you already know what a warrior or mage does, Conquest of Azeroth introduces completely custom classes with their own identities and mechanics. Some classes revolve around summoning creatures. Others focus on mobility. Some specialize in damage over time effects. Others transform into entirely different combat styles. Each class feels handcrafted instead of copied from Blizzard. And that's exactly why spending an extra 15 minutes reading each class description is worth it. Don't just look at whether a class is labeled as DPS, tank, or healer. Think about the kind of gameplay you actually enjoy. Do you like fast-paced combat? Do you enjoy managing pets? Would you rather support teammates? Do you prefer giant burst damage? Or do you enjoy slowly controlling the battlefield? The answers to those questions matter far more than watching a tier list on YouTube. Because balance changes. Fun doesn't. Tip number 3. Every class has more depth than you think. One thing that surprised me the most was how much depth each class actually has. At first glance, you might think you've already figured your class out after reading its description. Trust me, you haven't. Every class comes with multiple specializations, and each specialization can completely change how that class feels. Sometimes it almost feels like you're playing an entirely different character. You might begin as a melee fighter and later discover a specialization focused on ranged attacks. A tank might suddenly gain strong support abilities. A healer could also become a respectable damage dealer, depending on how they're built. That's why I recommend watching a few gameplay clips of your chosen class before committing dozens of hours into leveling. Reading abilities tells you one thing. Actually seeing the class in action tells you everything. Animations, rotation, movement, visual effects, resource generation. All of these things affect whether you'll enjoy playing that class for the next 100 hours. And remember, the strongest class isn't always the one you'll have the most fun playing. Tip number 4, don't chase the meta on day one. Let's be honest, every MMO community loves tier lists. Within hours of a new patch, you'll already see videos claiming, this class is S tier. This spec is completely broken. Never play this. Ignore most of it, especially if you're just starting. The reality is that almost nobody has perfect information during the early stages of a new realm. Players are still experimenting. Developers are still balancing. New builds are constantly being discovered. The class everyone calls weak today could become incredibly powerful after one update. And sometimes the so-called best class only performs well when played perfectly with in-game gear. If you're leveling your first character, that doesn't matter. Choose something that keeps you excited to log in every day. You'll learn faster. You'll enjoy the game more. And you'll probably perform better because you're actually invested in mastering your character instead of constantly wondering if you picked the wrong one. Tip number 5, read every talent instead of copying a build. This is probably the mistake I regret the most. Like many players, my instinct was to search online for the best build. Copy, paste, done. But Conquest of Azeroth isn't designed that way. Many talents don't simply increase your damage by 2%. They completely change how your abilities work. One talent might turn a single target spell into an area attack. Another could reduce cooldowns enough to completely change your rotation. Some talents create entirely new gameplay loops. That's why I encourage every new player to actually read the talent descriptions. Yes, it'll take a little longer. But understanding why you're choosing a talent is far more valuable than blindly copying someone else's setup. Eventually, you'll start recognizing synergies that other players overlook. And honestly, discovering your own build is one of the most satisfying parts of Conquest of Azeroth. Tip number 6. Your rotation matters more than your gear. This lesson took me longer than I'd like to admit. I kept thinking I needed better gear, better weapons, higher item level. But after watching experienced players, I realized something. They weren't winning because they had amazing gear. They were winning because they understood their class. They knew exactly which abilities to prioritize. They kept their buffs active. They managed their resources efficiently. They positioned themselves correctly. They minimized downtime between attacks. Meanwhile, I was pressing abilities almost at random. The difference in damage was enormous. Before you spend hours farming upgrades, spend 15 minutes practicing your rotation against training dummies or easier enemies. Learn which abilities generate resources. Learn which ones spend them. Figure out which cooldowns should be combined. Understand how your talents interact with your rotation. Those skills stay with you forever. Gear eventually gets replaced. Good gameplay doesn't. Now that we've talked about choosing your class and learning how to actually play it, let's move on to something that affects every single player, regardless of what class you choose. Because here's the thing. Most people don't struggle because they're underpowered. They struggle because they develop bad habits early on. Those habits seem harmless when you're level 10, but by level 40 or 60, they've snowballed into wasted gold, wasted time, and a lot of unnecessary frustration. I definitely learned that the hard way. Tip number 7, learn your resource system early. One thing I underestimated was just how important your class resource actually is. When you first start playing, it's easy to think your abilities are all that matter. You get a new spell, put it on your action bar, and press it whenever it's available. That works for the first few levels, but eventually the game expects you to understand why you're pressing each ability, not just when. Every class in Conquest of Azeroth has its own rhythm. Some specs revolve around generating resources before spending them in huge bursts. Others reward careful management over constant button mashing. Some become much stronger if you can maintain a cycle without interruptions. At first, I ignored that completely. If an ability lit up, I pressed it. If something came off cooldown, I pressed that too. It wasn't until I watched more experienced players that I realized they weren't just reacting to cooldowns. They were planning several abilities ahead. Think of combat like a conversation instead of random words. Every ability should naturally lead into the next one. Once you start understanding your class's flow, combat suddenly feels smoother. Your downtime disappears, enemies die faster, and the class starts feeling exactly the way the developers intended. If your character feels awkward or clunky, there's a good chance you haven't learned the rhythm yet, and that's perfectly normal. Spend a little time practicing against weaker enemies or target dummies before jumping into harder content. You'll be amazed at how much stronger your character feels without changing a single piece of gear. Tip number 8. Don't sell everything you loot. This one still hurts to think about. Like many longtime WoW players, I had developed a habit over the years. Kill enemies. Loot everything. Visit a vendor. Sell everything with a gray, white, or sometimes even green border. Repeat. In Conquest of Azeroth, that habit can come back to bite you. Some items that look completely worthless end up being useful for crafting, professions, quests, or even selling to other players. Just because an item doesn't improve your character immediately doesn't mean it has no value. Early on, I sold materials that I later needed for crafting. Then I had to buy them back for significantly more gold than I originally received. Not exactly my proudest financial decision. A good habit is to ask yourself one simple question before selling something. Could I possibly need this later? If the answer is maybe, throw it in your bank. Storage is cheap. Buying back rare materials usually isn't. Even if you eventually decide you don't need the item, you'll almost always be happier having kept it than realizing you sold it 2 weeks ago. Tip number 9. Pick your professions early. Let's talk about professions. I know. For a lot of players, professions are the least exciting part of any MMORPG. They're easy to ignore because they don't immediately make your character stronger. You'd rather be out fighting monsters than collecting herbs or mining ore. That was exactly my mindset, and it was a mistake. Professions aren't just something you worry about at max level. They're part of your progression from the very beginning. If you choose gathering professions while leveling, you'll naturally collect resources as you explore the world. Those materials can be sold for gold, used later for crafting, or saved until the economy grows. If you wait until level 60 to start, you'll have to revisit dozens of low-level zones just to collect materials you could have picked up naturally. That's hours of extra work that could have been avoided. Even if you don't know which crafting profession you eventually want, grabbing a couple of gathering professions early is rarely a bad decision. You're already running past those resource nodes. You might as well profit from them. Tip number 10. Gold is more valuable than you think. One of the biggest surprises for me wasn't combat. It was money, or more accurately, how quickly I ran out of it. When you're new, it's easy to assume gold will always come naturally. You complete quests. You sell loot. The number slowly goes up, until suddenly it doesn't. Repairs cost money. Profession materials cost money. Consumables cost money. Bigger bags cost money. Mount-related expenses cost money. And if you make bad purchasing decisions early on, you'll eventually find yourself staring at an empty wallet wondering where it all went. My advice is simple. Don't buy gear from vendors unless you genuinely need it. Don't waste gold on upgrades that you'll replace in 20 minutes. Don't impulse buy expensive items just because they look cool. Think of your early gold as an investment. Every coin you save now makes the rest of your journey smoother. Later in the game, earning gold becomes much easier. Early on, every silver actually matters. Tip number 11. Buy bigger bags as soon as you can. This sounds incredibly boring. It's also one of the highest quality of life upgrades you'll ever buy. Seriously. If you're still running around with tiny starting bags, you're spending far more time managing your inventory than actually playing the game. Every time your bags fill up, you're forced to make decisions. Should I delete this? Vendor that? Go back to town. Keep questing? All those little interruptions add up over dozens of hours. Larger bags solve that problem immediately. Instead of returning to town every 15 minutes, maybe now you're returning every 45. That means more questing, more experience, more gold, less frustration. It's one of those purchases that doesn't feel exciting when you make it. But after using larger bags for a few hours, you'll wonder how you ever played without them. Tip number 12. Slow down and explore. This is probably the most important advice in the entire video. Stop rushing. Seriously, modern MMO players have been conditioned to think the real game only begins at max level. Everything before that is just something to get through as quickly as possible. Conquest of Azeroth rewards a completely different mindset. Some of my favorite moments weren't dungeon drops. They weren't rare items. They weren't boss kills. They happened because I wandered off the road. I found quests I wasn't expecting. I discovered NPCs that made the world feel more alive. I stumbled into areas I'd normally ignore if I were rushing toward the next objective. Those moments are what make the experience memorable. Anyone can watch a speed leveling guide. Anyone can copy the fastest route. But if your only goal is reaching level cap as quickly as possible, you're skipping the very thing that makes Conquest of Azeroth feel different from every other WoW experience. Take a detour. Read a few quest descriptions. Look around once in a while. You only get one first playthrough. Don't accidentally skip it. By this point, you've hopefully picked a class you actually enjoy, you've started thinking more carefully about your talents, and you've hopefully stopped selling every single item you loot. But now we get into something that I think catches almost everyone off guard. The game doesn't become difficult because enemies suddenly have millions of health. It becomes difficult because it starts asking more from you as a player. Your decision-making matters more. Your positioning matters more. Your awareness matters more. And these next 6 tips are the ones that completely changed how I approach the game. Tip number 13. Read more than just the quest objectives. Let's be honest. Most of us are guilty of this. Accept quest. Skip the text. Look at the minimap. Run toward the yellow circle. Kill 10 wolves. Collect 8 herbs. Turn quest in. Repeat. That's basically how we've been trained to play World of Warcraft over the last 20 years. But Conquest of Azeroth surprised me because I started noticing something. Some quests weren't just there to give experience. They were trying to teach me something. Sometimes an NPC would explain why a mechanic worked the way it did. Other times they'd hint at where valuable rewards were located. Occasionally, they'd introduce lore that actually made the world feel connected instead of feeling like random objectives. Now, I'm not saying you need to read every single line of dialogue. Nobody expects you to spend 30 minutes reading quest text when you're trying to level. But slowing down every now and then adds so much more to the experience. It helps you understand why you're doing something instead of simply checking another box. And honestly, that's one of the reasons Conquest of Azeroth feels refreshing. It reminds you that Azeroth is supposed to feel like a world, not just a leveling route. Tip number 14. Crowd control is one of the strongest abilities you have. When I first started, my entire strategy could be summarized in one sentence. Kill it before it kills me. Simple. Effective. Until it wasn't. Eventually, I reached enemies that actually fought back. Pulling multiple packs suddenly became dangerous. Casters started throwing abilities at me from across the room. Elite enemies took longer to kill. That's when I realized something. Damage isn't always the answer. Sometimes the smartest play is preventing enemies from acting in the first place. Interrupts, stuns, roots, slows, silences, knockbacks. These abilities often look boring compared to giant damage numbers. But they're some of the strongest tools in your entire kit. Stopping a dangerous spell can save more health than any healing potion. Keeping enemies separated can make an impossible pull feel effortless. Once I started treating crowd control as part of my rotation instead of an emergency button, combat became dramatically easier. Don't wait until in-game to practice these abilities. Use them while leveling. By the time you reach harder content, using crowd control will feel completely natural. Tip number 15. Dying costs more than you think. Everybody dies. That's not the problem. The problem is underestimating how expensive death really is. When you die, most players only think about the obvious penalty. They think, okay, I have to run back. Maybe 30 seconds. Maybe a minute. No big deal. But that's not the real cost. The real cost is everything that comes with it. You've lost momentum. Any cooldowns you used before dying are now gone. You might have repair bills. You might need to fight your way back through enemies again. Maybe your group has to wait for you. Maybe you lose buffs. Maybe you lose confidence and start playing impatiently. One death easily turns into 5 or 10 minutes of lost progress. Now imagine that happening over the course of an entire leveling session. Suddenly you've lost an hour. All because you wanted to pull just one more pack. I used to think playing aggressively made me faster. Eventually, I realized that consistent, clean gameplay almost always beats reckless gameplay. Sometimes taking 10 extra seconds to plan a pull actually saves several minutes. Tip number 16. Join a guild earlier than you think. This might be the most underrated piece of advice in the entire video. Join a guild. Not because you need one, because you'll eventually wish you had one. MMOs have always been social games. But Conquest of Azeroth especially rewards players who ask questions, share builds, run dungeons together, and learn from each other. Some of the best advice I ever received didn't come from YouTube. It didn't come from Reddit. It came from random guild members answering questions in chat. Things like, actually, that talent works better with this ability. You should save that item. Don't sell those materials. This dungeon is much easier if you interrupt this boss. Little pieces of advice that saved me hours. A good guild isn't just about raiding. It's about having people around you who are learning the same game. Even if you're someone who prefers playing solo, having a community available makes the entire experience smoother. And honestly, MMOs are simply more fun when you have people to share those moments with. Tip number 17. Dungeons are the best place to learn your class. A lot of players treat dungeons as something they have to survive. I started looking at them differently. They're classrooms. Think about it. Out in the open world, most enemies die before they really test you. You don't need to use every cooldown. You don't always need proper positioning. You rarely need perfect rotations. Dungeons change that. Suddenly, enemies live long enough for your rotation to matter. Boss mechanics force you to move. Interrupts become important. Defensive cooldowns suddenly have value. You start paying attention to your teammates. You learn when to help, when to save cooldowns, when to burst damage, when to play safely. Every dungeon teaches you something about your class. Even failed runs teach valuable lessons. Maybe your damage wasn't high enough. Maybe you forgot an important ability. Maybe your positioning needed work. That's all useful information. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. That's literally how you improve. Tip number 18. Stop clicking your abilities. Okay, some of you are going to hate me for this one. If you're still clicking most of your abilities with your mouse, please start learning keybinds. I know, it feels awkward. It feels slower at first. Your fingers won't know where anything is. You'll accidentally press the wrong buttons. You'll probably get frustrated. Everyone goes through that phase. But once your muscle memory develops, everything changes. Your eyes spend less time looking at your action bars. You react faster. Movement becomes smoother. Combat becomes more fluid. Instead of thinking, where is that ability? Your hands already know. You simply press it. Even binding just your 10 or 12 most frequently used abilities makes a massive difference. You don't have to become some esports level player overnight. Just improve a little every day. Future you will be incredibly grateful. If you've made it this far, you've already avoided a lot of the mistakes that slowed me down during my first playthrough. But these last few tips aren't just about leveling faster or dealing more damage. They're about getting the most out of the game itself. Because after spending dozens of hours in Conquest of Azeroth, I realized something. The players who enjoy the game the most aren't always the ones with the best gear. They're the ones who understand how to make the game work for them. Tip number 19. Customize your user interface. One mistake I carried over from years of playing WoW was assuming the default interface was good enough. Technically, it works. But works and works well are two very different things. When fights start getting more complex, your screen fills with cooldowns, buffs, debuffs, enemy casts, resource bars, quest objectives, chat windows, and floating combat text. If everything is scattered around your screen, your eyes are constantly moving, and every extra second spent searching for information is a second you're not reacting to the fight. I didn't realize how much this mattered until I cleaned up my UI. I moved my action bars closer to the center of the screen. I made my resource bar easier to see. I organized my bags, cleaned up unnecessary windows, and made sure important information was always visible. The difference was immediate. Combat felt less chaotic because I wasn't fighting my interface anymore. You don't need to spend hours downloading dozens of add-ons or copying someone else's layout. Just make sure the things you need to see are easy to find. Your cooldowns, your health, your resources, and enemy casts should all be visible without forcing your eyes to travel across the entire screen. A clean interface doesn't make your character stronger. It makes you a better player. Tip number 20. Keep good gear, even if you can't use it yet. This is one of those lessons you only learn after making the mistake yourself. At some point while leveling, you'll find an item that doesn't seem useful. Maybe the stats aren't perfect for your current specialization. Maybe it's meant for a different role. Maybe you think, I'll never use this. So you sell it. A few days later, you decide to try another specialization. Suddenly, that item would have been perfect. Now it's gone. Conquest of Azeroth encourages experimentation. Many classes have multiple ways to play, and as you unlock more talents, your priorities can change. A weapon that seemed mediocre at level 20 might become amazing once your build evolves. Unless you're desperate for inventory space or gold, it's often worth hanging on to gear that looks promising. Storage is cheap. Replacing a great item isn't always. Future you will appreciate having options instead of starting from scratch. Tip number 21. Experiment with your build. One of my favorite things about Conquest of Azeroth is that it rewards curiosity. In almost every MMO, there's pressure to copy the strongest build. People search YouTube, open a guide, copy every talent, never change anything. While guides are incredibly useful, don't let them stop you from experimenting. Some talents might fit your playstyle better than what's considered optimal. Maybe you prefer a smoother rotation over slightly higher damage. Maybe you value survivability because you mostly play solo. Maybe your build works better in dungeons than it does in raids. Those differences matter. Some of the most enjoyable builds I've played weren't the ones sitting at the top of a tier list. They were the ones that felt natural to me. Learning why a build works is far more valuable than simply copying it. And who knows? You might discover combinations that other players haven't even considered yet. That's part of the fun. Tip number 22. Read the patch notes. Here's something that surprises a lot of newer players. The game you're playing today probably won't be exactly the same a month from now. Conquest of Azeroth is still evolving. Classes get adjusted. Talents change. Bugs get fixed. New features are introduced, and balance shifts happen as developers gather more feedback from the community. If you ignore patch notes for several weeks, you might log in one day wondering why your favorite ability suddenly feels different. Keeping up with updates doesn't mean you need to study every line like you're preparing for an exam. Just spend a few minutes reading the major changes. Pay attention to your class. See if your favorite specialization received buffs, nerfs, or quality of life improvements. Staying informed helps you adapt instead of getting caught off guard. The best players aren't just mechanically skilled. They're informed. Tip number 23. Learn from better players, but don't compare yourself to them. One of the best things you can do is watch experienced players. Whether it's YouTube, Twitch, or someone in your own guild, there's always something to learn. You might notice a more efficient rotation, a clever talent combination, or a dungeon strategy you hadn't considered. Watching others helped me improve much faster than I would have on my own. But there's a trap here. Don't compare your beginning to someone else's hundreds of hours of experience. It's easy to watch a creator delete bosses and think, why am I so weak? The answer is simple. They've practiced. They've experimented. They've probably made every mistake you're making right now. Use experienced players as inspiration, not as a measuring stick. Focus on becoming a little better than you were yesterday. That's how real progress happens. Tip number 24. Be patient with your class. This is probably the tip I needed most. Some classes don't immediately feel amazing. During the first few levels, your toolkit is limited. You might be missing important talents, cooldowns, or abilities that completely change the way the class plays. I almost abandoned one of my favorite classes because I judged it too early. A few levels later, everything clicked. Suddenly, the rotation made sense. Abilities started interacting with each other. Combat became faster, smoother, and far more satisfying. If your class feels a little awkward at first, don't panic. Give it time. Most classes evolve dramatically as you unlock more of their toolkit. Sometimes the class you almost deleted becomes your favorite character. Tip number 25. Don't rush to finish the game. And finally, this is the biggest lesson I learned. Stop treating the journey like an obstacle. Modern MMOs have trained us to think that nothing matters until max level. Every guide talks about the fastest route, the best experience per hour, or the quickest way to reach endgame. There's nothing wrong with efficiency, but don't let efficiency steal the experience. Some of my favorite memories didn't come from getting better loot. They came from finding a hidden quest, helping another player, trying a strange talent combination, exploring an area I wasn't supposed to be in yet, or simply laughing after an unexpected disaster in a dungeon. Those are the moments you'll actually remember. Months from now, you probably won't remember how long it took you to reach max level. You'll remember the adventures. You'll remember the people. You'll remember the stories. Conquest of Azeroth gives you an opportunity to experience Azeroth in a completely different way. Don't be in such a hurry that you miss it. So there you have it. Those are the 25 things I genuinely wish someone had told me before I started playing Conquest of Azeroth. Hopefully, this video saves you from making at least a few of the mistakes that I made during my first adventure. If it did, let me know down in the comments. Which class are you planning to main, and what's been your biggest surprise so far? I'm always interested to see what everyone is enjoying, and your comments might even help other new players decide what to try next. If you're looking for more Conquest of Azeroth content, don't worry. This is just the beginning. I'm already working on class guides, leveling tips, gold-making strategies, dungeon walkthroughs, and in-game builds. My goal is to build one of the best resources for both new and experienced KOA players. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, make sure to subscribe, because there's a lot more on the way. Thanks so much for watching. Good luck on your adventure, and I'll see you in the next one.